The sun hung low over the golden fields of Willow Creek, painting the horizon in hues of amber and crimson. Lila, barely 19, wiped sweat from her brow, her hands calloused from years of working her father's small farm. The land was stubborn, yielding just enough to keep them afloat but never enough to dream beyond the next harvest. Her faded blue dress clung to her frame, patched at the hem, and her boots were caked with the earth she'd tilled since dawn. Yet her eyes sparkled with a quiet resilience, a fire that no hardship could dim. That evening, as Lila hauled a basket of potatoes toward the barn, she noticed a figure slumped against the old oak at the edge of their property. An old man, his clothes tattered and his face etched with exhaustion, sat clutching a worn walking stick. His white beard was unkempt and his eyes, half closed, seemed to carry the weight of a lifetime. Lila's father, Amos, would have warned her to keep her distance. Strangers were rare in these parts, and trust was a luxury they couldn't afford. But something about the man's frailty tugged at her heart. She set the basket down and approached. "Sir, are you all right?" she called softly, her voice cutting through the evening stillness. The man stirred, his gaze meeting hers. "Just resting, child," he rasped, his voice brittle like dry leaves. "Been walking a long way." Lila glanced at the horizon where the road stretched endlessly into the dusk. No one walked this far out unless they were lost or running from something. "You look like you could use some water. Maybe some food, too. Come with me." He hesitated, his pride flickering in his eyes, but hunger won out. Lila helped him to his feet, her arm steady under his trembling frame, and led him to the farmhouse. The kitchen was modest, with a chipped table and a single lantern casting a warm glow. She sat him down, poured water from a jug, and sliced a thick piece of cornbread from the day's baking. Her father was out tending the fences, so it was just the two of them. "What's your name?" she asked, sliding the plate toward him. "Ezra," he said between bites, his hands shaking as he held the bread. "Ezra Holt. I'm Lila. You're welcome to rest here tonight. We've got a cot in the barn. It's not much, but it's dry." Ezra's eyes softened, but he said little, eating slowly as if savoring each crumb. Lila didn't press him for his story. Folks in Willow Creek knew better than to pry. Instead, she talked about the farm, the stubborn soil, the way the stars looked brighter out here than anywhere else. Her warmth filled the room, and for the first time in days, Ezra felt a flicker of peace. The next morning, Lila woke to find Ezra already up, sitting on a stool by the barn, whittling a small piece of wood with a pocket knife. He looked stronger, though still frail, and his eyes followed her as she fed the chickens. "You don't have to do much for an old man like me," he said, his voice steadier now. "I'll be on my way soon." "No rush," Lila replied, scattering grain. "You're no trouble. Besides, Pa could use a hand with the fence if you're feeling up to it." Ezra chuckled, a dry, rusty sound. "Been a while since I held a hammer, but I'll try." Over the next few days, Ezra became a quiet fixture on the farm. He wasn't much for heavy labor, but he fixed a broken gate, sharpened tools, and even told Lila stories of places he'd been, cities with towering buildings, rivers that roared like thunder, and markets bursting with colors she could only imagine. His tales were vivid, but he never spoke of family or where he was headed. And Lila didn't ask. She saw the sadness in his eyes, the kind that came from carrying too much for too long. Amos, a gruff man hardened by years of struggle, was skeptical at first. "He's eating our food, Lila," he muttered one night. "We can't afford to feed every drifter who wanders by." "He's helping, Pa," she said firmly. "And he's got nowhere else to go." "Ain't that enough?" Amos grumbled, but didn't argue. Lila had her mother's heart, and he'd learned long ago that arguing with her kindness was like arguing with the wind. One afternoon, as Lila and Ezra sat shelling peas on the porch, a sleek black car rolled up the dirt road, its engine purring, like something out of a dream. Willow Creek wasn't a place for fancy cars. Most folks drove rusted pickups or walked. Lila stood, shielding her eyes against the sun, as a man stepped out. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, with sharp features and a demeanor that screamed wealth. He scanned the farm, his gaze landing on Ezra. "Father?" the man called, his voice a mix of disbelief and relief. Ezra froze, the peapod in his hand falling to the ground. Lila looked between them, her mind racing. Father? This polished stranger, who looked like he'd never touched dirt in his life, was Ezra's son? James, Ezra said, his voice barely above a whisper. He stood slowly, his hands trembling not from age but from something deeper. Lila stepped back, sensing the weight of the moment. James crossed the yard in long strides, his polished shoes kicking up dust. We've been looking for you for weeks. Why didn't you tell anyone where you were going? Ezra's jaw tightened. Didn't think you'd care. James flinched, but he didn't back down. You disappeared, Dad. No note, no call. I thought... His voice broke and he ran a hand through his hair. I thought you were gone for good this time. Lila watched, her heart pounding. She'd pieced together enough from Ezra's stories to know he'd lived a life far removed from Willow Creek, but this was something else. James's watch glinted in the sunlight, probably worth more than their farm. She felt like an intruder in her own yard. Ezra turned to her, his eyes heavy with something unspoken. Lila, this is my son, James Holt. James, this is Lila. She took me in when I had nothing. James looked at her, really looked, and for a moment his polished exterior softened. Thank you, he said, his voice sincere. You don't know what this means. Lila nodded, unsure what to say. The air was thick with questions, but she held them back. Instead, she offered, You're welcome to come inside. Got coffee if you want it. James hesitated, then followed her into the kitchen, Ezra trailing behind. Over coffee, the story unraveled. Ezra had been a successful businessman decades ago, building a real estate empire that his son now ran. But success had come at a cost. Ezra's marriage crumbled, and his relationship with James frayed under the weight of long hours and unspoken resentments. A year ago, Ezra had walked away from it all, tired of a life that felt hollow despite its wealth. He'd been wandering ever since, living off what little he carried, searching for something he couldn't name. I didn't think you'd miss me, Ezra admitted, staring into his cup. You had your life, your money. Didn't seem like you needed an old man slowing you down. James's face tightened. You're my father, I don't care about the rest. Lila listened, her heart aching for both of them. She thought of her own father, how they'd clashed over the years but never stopped loving each other. She wanted to say something, to bridge the gap between them, but words felt too small. The next morning, James insisted on repaying Lila's kindness. He pulled out a checkbook, scribbling a number that made her eyes widen, more money than she'd ever seen. Take it, he said. It's the least I can do. Lila stared at the check, her hands trembling. It could save the farm, pay off their debts, give her father a chance to rest. But something in her rebelled. She pushed it back across the table. I didn't help your father for money, she said quietly. I helped him because it was right. James blinked, unaccustomed to refusal. Ezra watched her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Told you, he murmured to his son. She's different. Over the next few days, James stayed in Willow Creek, renting a room at the town's only inn. He visited the farm daily, not just to check on Ezra, but to talk with Lila and Amos. He was drawn to their simplicity, their resilience, the way they found joy in small things. A good harvest, a clear night sky. It was a world he'd never known, one his wealth couldn't buy. One evening, as the four of them sat on the porch watching the stars, Ezra spoke up. I've been running from my past for too long, he said, his voice steady. Lila, you reminded me what it means to be human. Not just to take, but to give. I want to stay here if you'll have me. Not as a burden, but as part of this place. Amos raised an eyebrow, but Lila smiled. You're no burden, Ezra. You're family now. James, who'd been quiet, cleared his throat. I'd like to help too, not with money, he added, quickly, seeing Lila's expression. With my hands, I could learn a thing or two about this life. Lila laughed, the sound bright and free. "You sure you can handle a shovel, city boy?" "Try me," James shot back, a grin breaking through. Months passed and the farm changed. Ezra stayed, his strength returning as he worked alongside Lila and Amos. James visited often, trading his suits for jeans, learning to plant and mend fences. The farm thrived, not because of money, but because of the hands that worked it, the hearts that cared for it. Lila watched Ezra and James rebuild their bond, their laughter filling the fields where silence once reigned. One crisp autumn evening, as they gathered for supper, Lila looked around the table. Her father, Ezra, James, and her. The room was warm with light and love, and she felt a swell of gratitude. She'd given a stranger a meal and a bed, expecting nothing in return. But in that act of kindness, she'd gained something far greater. A family forged not by blood, but by the quiet power of humanity.